It's Bengals and Jets on Sunday. The Bengals looking to get to 500. The Jets, well, they're looking for a quarterback. We'll get into it right now on a special crossover edition of Locked On Bengals and Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to Locked On Bengals, Locked On Jets. He's John Butchko. I'm James Rapien, and we're going to get you all set already for Sunday's matchup between the Bengals and the Jets at Paycor Stadium. This crossover Thursday is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Shout out to all of our everydayers, all of our first listens of both Locked On Bengals and Locked On Jets. And John, this is certainly an interesting matchup between two teams that I didn't have a few weeks ago as this being a revenge game. And yet here we are. You got Joe Flacco on one side. You have quarterback uncertainty on the other. I assume the quarterback uncertainty is dominating the New York Jets talk this week.
Well, James, it's funny because the joke around the Jets fan base was the Bengals traded for Flacco specifically to make it a revenge game, because we've had revenge games since week one, starting with Aaron Rodgers. We had Elijah Moore week two, Todd Bowles and Hassan Reddick week three. I'm not going to go down the list, but like every week's been a revenge game for the New York Jets this season. So I think the Bengals had to make that trade to make sure that the streak would stay intact. But yeah, the quarterback situation for the Jets is pretty messy. So at the time we are recording this podcast, there has not yet been an official announcement, but I think we can expect that at some point this week, the Jets will announce that Tyrod Taylor is stepping into the starting lineup for many reasons. But at the top of the list, Justin Fields has reached a point where they had no choice but to bench him against Carolina on Sunday. And I, heading into Sunday's game against Carolina, had felt like, you still stick with Fields because he gives you more upside than Tyrod Taylor. But watching that first half, particularly the sacks he took, I mean, it was just the look of a quarterback who's completely lost. And having covered the Jets for as long as I have, I've seen that look in a quarterback before where, he's just staring down a screen and taking a sack, or his footwork's not even matching up with the receiver's routes. Fields just looked completely lost. And while Tyrod Taylor is limited, he at least will get the ball out. I mean, I'll tell you, I was following this game online, and Tyrod Taylor threw 2 interceptions in the second half after replacing Fields against Carolina. And a lot of the reception from the Jets fan base was, well, at least he's throwing the football, because Fields was very, very hesitant. So it speaks volumes about where you're at when your fan base is not upset with your quarterback for throwing interceptions, because at least he's throwing the ball.
That's kind of wild, because Jake Browning a few weeks ago, who I think during his 3-week stretch was the worst quarterback in the league, he was throwing the ball. He was throwing the ball to the other team or to the wrong guy. And it was kind of and so to take that another layer and see him hold on to it, it's rough, because from a physically gifted standpoint, Justin Fields has that. And you think, oh, well, he's going to run and he can, and I know Garrett Wilson's nicked up right now, but like he can launch deep balls to Garrett Wilson. Like on paper, I understood the Justin Fields addition and see if you can get more out of him than what was previously gotten. And yet here we are, it's week 8. And it feels like the Fields experiment isn't just benched for now and he'll be back. Like it feels over.
Yeah. I mean, because Taylor's the only other quarterback on the roster, they may have to put Fields back in at some point. Yeah. Tyrod through his career has not been a durable guy. He's a guy who's injured frequently. The only other quarterback who's, like part of the Jets right now is a undrafted rookie who's on the practice squad, Brady Cook. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, I'm not sure if Fields is taking his last snap, but it's pretty clear that the experiment is a failure. It's pretty clear that Fields is very unlikely to be back next season. The thing I don't really understand is it didn't seem like the Jets really built their offense around Fields' skill set. They were not a team that were using a lot of design quarterback runs. There's a lot of things that like they didn't do. There weren't a lot of RPOs in their offense when Fields was playing quarterback, which is something he ran effectively at Ohio State. Not a lot of half field reads, just like the sort of things you would think you'd run with Justin Fields. So I almost like don't understand why they signed Justin Fields if they were going to run this sort of offense, because this is like kind of a conventional NFL offense, and we know that that's not something that's in Justin Fields' wheelhouse at this point of his career. So I think that, look, Fields has not played well enough, but I think there also have to be questions about the Jets' approach to everything, because Fields has been really bad, and it's gotten to a point where he's playing at a lower level than he did in Chicago. And, you can say Fields maybe didn't succeed in Chicago, but he also wasn't this bad where, he was getting benched after 5.5 starts. So I think there's a lot of blame to go around, but James, you're absolutely right. I think that this experiment is reached its end point.
And meanwhile, Bengals wise, it felt like that. I mean, it's a very similar feeling after their 3-game losing streak. And then the rumors were buzzing in the air after what was that final loss? It was to Detroit. And so they lose. They go on the road without Joe Burrow. They lose to Minnesota. They lose to Denver. Tough defenses. You come home for Detroit, and you're like, all right, well, let's see them be competitive. And Jake Browning ensures that that's not the case until the fourth quarter. And so the Bengals were on the phone calling everybody and seeing what their options were at quarterback. They go get Joe Flacco, and he's thrown 5 touchdowns, no picks, after with the Browns throwing 2 touchdowns and 6 picks in 2 starts, has been able to right the ship, thrown for 561 yards, has really brought new life to not just this offense, but the entire franchise. And it's let's start here, because you have a unique perspective, because we've covered a ton of Locked On Bengals listeners have heard plenty about Flacco over the past couple of weeks. How surprised are you, given where he was a few years ago with the Jets, to see him now in 2025, not just 2023 with the Browns, but now 2025, at least injecting a little bit of fun. Who knows how long this lasts, but a little Flacco fun to the Bengals.
Yeah. So I'm not surprised. If you'd asked me in early 2025, am I surprised by this? The answer would be no. But during his tenure with the Jets, I mean, it seemed like Flacco was at the end of the line.
Agreed.
In fact, I mean, I think you could say, like, you go back to the end of his tenure with Baltimore, it just seemed like his days as a starter in this league were over. You really did not see many positive traits left in him. And then, he had that like renaissance late in the 2023 season when the Browns suffered all those injuries at the quarterback position. I mean, I remember Flacco actually started a game for the Jets back in 2022 against the Bengals when Zach Wilson was hurt. And I remember my post-game recap, which looking back is kind of funny. I said, I can't wait for Zach Wilson to get back, because this offense can't do anything with Flacco in there. He was, he had really become like the ultimate check down artist. I mean, I don't really know how to explain it. He's had one of the strangest career arcs I've ever seen, where, he started out in Baltimore. He was kind of like the game manager with the Ravens, slowly improved, got to the point where, is Joe Flacco elite, became a meme. They win the Super Bowl. And from that point, they got the big contract with Baltimore, and things just kind of fell off. And he kind of went through the natural regression. It ended with a stint with the Jets as the backup quarterback, as many once good careers did. And then he goes to Cleveland and has kind of like finds this new life. I think that when you got a veteran like Flacco, if you put him into a good situation, he still has enough in his arm to succeed. I think if you put him in a situation like the Jets had those 3 years he was here as the backup quarterback, where you don't really have an offensive line, look, we know he's not mobile. We know he can't buy any extra time. Most of those years, they did not have quality receivers. So, I don't know that Flacco is really a guy that can transcend a bad situation at this point, but you put him into a situation where even if it's not a perfect situation, even if you don't have a great offensive line, but you have a number 1 receiver like Jamar Chase, he can still throw the ball. He can still make plays for you.
For sure. And that's what we're seeing. And that was my initial reaction to the trade is, hey, at least you have a guy who can get the ball to your weapons. And he's done that and then some. And I think what's so interesting about this game Sunday is no one expected them to win in Green Bay. Then they 4 days later play the Steelers, and it's a kitchen sink game is how I would describe it. It was a must win. They had to beat the Steelers to kind of give themselves a shot to feel like there's hope. Well, now this is different, because it's a better win. Like you can't let the Jets win, because you need this game when you look at the schedule, if you're hoping to stay in the playoff playoff hunt. And there's a lot of weird stuff going on with the Jets quarterback wise. And so can Joe in this offense continue to deliver? It's one of the big matchups we will discuss coming up next year on a special Locked On crossover. This show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the app you need right now. And, well, I got to be honest, it's daily fantasy the way it should be. Daily fantasy where you're looking and you're like, all right, well, I know Josh Allen's going to throw for a ton of yards, or I know Joe Flacco's going to throw for a ton of yards, or you know what? I think Tyrod Taylor is going to have a huge game against that Bengals defense. Well, with Prize Picks, you put that knowledge to the test and you can get paid. All you do is pick more or less on player projections and boom, there you go. It's real easy to do. You don't have to worry about injuries. You don't have to worry about standings or anything like that go these other fantasy leagues. It is fantasy football the way it should be. And right now, the NBA back, of course, you can get in on all the fun with Steph Curry and company as well. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. The show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app that's going to make life so much easier for you, whether you're a Jets fan coming to town to watch Jets Bengals on Sunday. Maybe, just maybe, there will be some Jets fans in the crowd, or maybe you're a Bengals fan making the trek and you're like, I really want to see Joe Flacco versus Tyrod Taylor in the year 2025, which is not something that I thought we would be saying. Regardless, Game Time is going to make that experience really easy and find the perfect 100% authentic tickets, and you're going to get those delivered on time. And if you want last minute deals, they have those as well. They have zone deals. It's fast. It's easy. I used it this week, and it's not just for NFL games. Used it this week to go to a comedy show that I'm going to go see on Saturday at Taft Theater. So get there now by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON NFL, Locked On NFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, John, let's continue the conversation here with some of the big matchups. And I do think the first one that I'm intrigued by, because there's so much discussion and talk about the quarterback situation with the Jets. But for me, this Bengals team, the reason it's been different over the past 6 quarters and certainly last week against the Steelers is Joe Flacco had time. They were able to open up running lanes and they were able to protect Joe, and he got the ball out to the Bengals playmakers. So how do you view this Jets defensive front? Because anytime I think of the Jets defensive front, I think of Quinnen Williams, who's obviously a great player.
Yes, and Quinnen Williams is having an excellent season. The best way I can describe the Jets defensive front is that there's high quality at the top, but there is not a lot of depth. A couple of years ago, the Jets had one of the deepest defensive lines in the league, particularly at the defensive end spot. I mean, they could roll out Jermaine Johnson and John Franklin Myers. They had behind them Bryce Huff and former Bengal Carl Lawson. They even had Will McDonald as a rookie. This was a team that could send in substitutions in waves and still have high quality snaps coming on every single play. There is not that level of depth now on this Jets defensive line. There are 3 players who have decent track records in this league. Quinnen Williams is one of them. Then at the defensive, at least as far as pass rushers go, they do have a couple of good run-stopping nose tackles. But as far as pass rushers go, Quinnen Williams at defensive tackle. Then at defensive end, you have Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald. And McDonald's having kind of a down year after a 10.5 sack season last year. Behind them, though, the defensive end spot becomes very weak very fast. You have Michael Clemens, who is a 4th-year guy who really has not developed. You have a couple of young guys, Tyler Barron and Braden McGregor, who Barron's a late-round pick. McGregor's a non-drafted free agent. Neither of them have really shown much lately. And you saw a couple times in the Jets game against Carolina where the Jets tried to get their starters a break. They had their second-team defensive line in there, and those were some of the most successful stretches Carolina had during that game. So this Jets team is one where they need to lean on their top guys, particularly in terms of the pass rush, because the first-team guys can hold their own, but the second-team guys cannot.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting. You mentioned Will McDonald, and I know that's someone that trade deadline wise, I think it's going to come up at times, right? Quinnen Williams, I discussed him, and I wonder starter wise if this Bengals starting unit, as we record this, it's Wednesday, and I'm not sure if it's going to be Dalton Reisner for a third straight game at left guard, if they're going to go back to Dylan Fairchild, the rookie. I assume they'll stick with Reisner because he's played so well over the past couple of weeks with Joe Flacco at quarterback. Do they stick with Jalen Rivers? Do they not? It's worth noting Rivers and Fairchild are listed as the starting guards, but that's a huge storyline to me because when I think of the path to Joe Flacco regressing and throwing some picks and having his worst game as a Bengal and the Jets being in it and Tyrod Taylor having a chance late in this game, like how does that go? What's that path? Well, I think this defensive front versus the Bengals offensive line, I think that's a huge part of it because if the Bengals can't run the ball and Joe Flacco turns it over a few times, which he hasn't done yet, but I assume it's going to happen at some point, then this could be one of those games. And I don't overlook anyone. And you look at the path, and I certainly think that's the path to the Jets not just being competitive but winning on Sunday.
Absolutely. And I think, as we know, Flacco, for what he does bring to the table, is not particularly mobile. Now, there was a Thursday night game late in 2023 when the Jets played the Browns, and I talked about how Flacco could not make plays from outside the pocket. And of course, in that game, I think he had more passing yards from outside the pocket in the first half than he had at any other point in any other full game in his career. So I heard a lot about that, and I was kind of like, come on, it's Joe Flacco. Like, who could have seen him making a lot of plays outside the pocket? But, that was an abnormal game. I think you're absolutely right that any path to the Jets pulling off the upset here requires the defensive line to get pressure to Flacco because he's not a guy who can buy a lot of time from outside the pocket. And that's, if you give him time, he still has the brain. He still seems like his arm's there's still enough arm where he can pick a defense apart. We saw that against Pittsburgh, but you generate pressure on him, late in his career. I think he's actually become more mistake prone than he was earlier in his career. In his Baltimore days, he actually protected the ball pretty well, but a couple of seasons lately in his career, he's had relatively high interception rates. So there is a pathway for the Jets, but it requires this defense getting to him and actually being opportunistic, which is not something they've been most of the season. This is a Jets defense that has struggled to force turnovers. If they want to register the first win of the season, that's got to change in this one, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think the turnover element is such a big factor. By the way, just a quick nugget, Bengals safety Jordan Battle has 3 interceptions, 1 in each Bengals win. I don't think that's a coincidence that when he's able to get the ball and this Bengals defense is able to force turnovers, it gets the ball back to the offense. And guess what? They've won those games. When they've struggled to force turnovers, they haven't. And it was wacky in the three-game Jake Browning era. There's no doubt. But defensively, and this is what another matchup that I just think is so intriguing. This Bengals defense was awful last week. They were awful. They forced a couple of turnovers in the first half, but they could not get off the field against Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers finds Pat Freiermuth for a 68-yard touchdown with just over 2 minutes to go. And whether it's big plays, whether it's getting gashed in the run, missed tackles, like Breece Hall could play now. Like there's guys there that can play and make plays if you don't know how to do basic things like tackle. And so I do think that this defense going up against Taylor and Breece Hall and can you do the basic things well? I'll be looking for that on Sunday for this Bengals unit.
Well, James, there's no remedy for a struggling defense like facing the Jets offense. That's been true through much of the season. I mean, the Jets have faced, there have been so many times I've done these crossover shows through the first 8 weeks of the season where my colleague tells me their defense is struggling and they go in and they dominate the Jets offense. It's going to be tough for the Jets because Garrett Wilson's probably not going to play in this game. This is a receiver group where the number one guy without Garrett Wilson is probably Josh Reynolds, who I think if you're generous is a low end number 3 receiver. It's real. And this has been an ongoing topic on Locked On Jets for months that the Jets really mishandled the wide receiver position this offseason. They gave Garrett Wilson absolutely no support. I think that the key matchup I have when the Jets have the ball is going to be Olu Fashanu versus Trey Hendrickson because the state of the Jets wide receiver position is such that nobody's going to be able to break open immediately. I mean, I don't care who the Bengals are playing in their secondary. These Jets receivers cannot separate initially. So that means that Tyrod Taylor is going to have be able to spend some time in the pocket. And part of this is he's going to have to use his mobility to buy time. But the Jets can't have a situation where Trey Hendrickson has a big game. Olu Fashanu is a second-year guy out of Penn State. He was the Jets' first-round pick a year ago. He hasn't been awful this year, but I think this season's been a little bit disappointing. He's definitely had some games where there have been hiccups in pass protection, and this is going to be a major test for him. Again, talking about what's the path to an upset for the Jets, it cannot involve Trey Hendrickson taking over this game, and I think he's got the potential to do that. I think the Jets' game plan really has to focus on him and give Fashanu extra help.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's the one guy on the Bengals defense that you're like, man, can't let him take over. DJ Turner's been great at corner recently, but plenty to discuss here as we continue to analyze the paths to victory for the Jets and the Bengals. We'll do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Mazda. Move and be moved with Mazda. As we look here, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move, and that's why they deliver confidence with every ride. They have more IIHS top safety picks and awards than anyone else as of August of this year. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery, and take everyday rides that feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And of course, they have all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, so you can drive through any weather with confidence all season long. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, let's get into we've hit on it a little bit. This Jets path to victory. What do the Jets need to do to get Aaron Glenn his first win and get him maybe a Gatorade bath or a game ball at Paycor Stadium on Sunday?
I have three things that I think the Jets need to do. Number one is, don't forget you're allowed to run the football. And I say that somewhat sarcastically because the second half of the game against Carolina, Tyrod Taylor's in there. You have your backup quarterback who got none of the first team reps all week. You have the receiver group I described, where you have Josh Reynolds, Tyler Johnson, Arian Smith, and Alan Lazard out there. And the Jets ran the ball 4 times in the entire second half of a close game. And that's even exaggerating it, because 2 of the 4 runs were Tyrod Taylor scrambles. The Jets completely abandoned the run game in the second half, and it did not make a lot of sense. You have a quality running back in Breece Hall. The number 2 guy is Isaiah Davis, who was a late round pick a year ago. It's unclear how much Isaiah Davis can offer, but he runs hard. He's shown some flashes. So, when your passing game is as challenged as the Jets is, you can't abandon the run game the way they did. There have been a couple other games where they've gotten away from the run, but those were games where they were down multiple scores in the second half. That game against Carolina was never more than a 10-point game, and the Jets just stopped running the ball. They stopped trying to run the ball, and it really did not make a lot of sense. My number 2 key is you have to utilize the non-wide receivers in your passing game. That means the running backs, Breece Hall and Isaiah Davis. You've got to get to the screen game. You got to utilize them, try and create favorable matchups for them, even if that's sticking them in the slot occasionally. It also means utilizing Mason Taylor, the rookie tight end, because, as I mentioned, the receiver group is what it is. You're not going to get a lot of production from these guys at the wide receiver position. And my third key is you got to be opportunistic on defense. And that means, as we discussed a little bit earlier, getting into Flacco's face and hoping you force some errant throws. And if plays are there to be made, you have to make them. In week 1, when the Jets lost to the Steelers, they dropped 2 potential interceptions off Aaron Rodgers. They catch either of them, they probably win the game. It also means, going for the football, trying to strip the ball out. With a team as offensively challenged as the Jets will be with this lack of firepower on offense, you have to figure out ways to produce short fields. Now, part of that could come on special teams, where the Jets have been a pretty good return team the last couple of weeks, but I think this defense has to produce turnover situations, but also convert them, because the Jets, I mean, I think fumble recovery rate's kind of random. A lot of it comes down to luck, but the Jets have had a really bad fumble recovery rate this year, and they have not converted when they've had opportunities to pick the pass off. So I think those are three things the Jets absolutely have to do to win the game.
Yeah, I think there's a path, and for the Bengals, the number one thing is to eliminate that path early. Like if you have a team like this that's making a quarterback change and there's so much uncertainty, well, they scored on 7 of their last 8 possessions last week against the Steelers. Like, scoring your first 4 this week. Like, just make it so, and there might be field goals. I'm not saying they're going to go up 28-0 or anything, but like, can you midway through the second quarter be in command of the game where it's 10-3 or 10-0 or 13-3? That's not something the Bengals have done really at any point this year, super consistently. Even last week, they didn't have any points midway through the second quarter, and they were down 10-0. So they haven't scored a first quarter touchdown in well over a month, John. And so doing that, especially in a matchup like this, where you don't want the Jets to start believing midway through the game or whatever, and you know how that can be in the league, because that certainly happens regularly. I think that's big. And then outside of that, I think it's 2 things. It's one, on offense, can you continue to be explosive on the run game? They had runs of 37 yards and 28 yards last week from Chase Brown. He averaged over 9 yards a carry. He's not going to do that every week. I get that. But a couple of explosive runs go a long way toward opening things up. And now you have to account for the run. You have to think about Chase Brown. And, well, there's that guy named Jamar Chase on one side, T. Higgins on the other. And that just gives Joe Flacco a lot of answers to the test. And so the explosive run part of it, not just running it effectively, but being explosive a couple of times a game, I think is big. And then the third one, and you hinted at it last segment, is Trey Hendrickson. One, you need Trey. 2, you got to get pressure on Tyrod Taylor. You got to make him uncomfortable. You got to make sure that he doesn't have all day to throw. Aaron Rodgers had 8.6 seconds to throw on his first touchdown pass last week. 8.6 seconds. Like, I don't care if it's Tyrod Taylor. Even Justin Fields. It doesn't matter who it is. If you give him 8.6 seconds, at some point he's going to find someone and make a play. And that's a huge factor here, is this pass rush. And it's going to be a huge topic, not just Sunday, but moving forward. But can they be steady, be consistent? They didn't have Trey Hendrickson last week. They're hopeful this week. But regardless, Trey, no Trey, you can't give Taylor 8+ seconds to throw.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head on all of your points, James. I think especially the one about, can the Bengals take control of this game early? Because, as you know, it's a cliche. Any given Sunday, the Jets may be 0-7, but in 4 of the games, they were right there. The 4 of the games could have swung on one play. And, so much about one score games sometimes comes down to a lucky break. If you let a team like the Jets stay in, eventually they're going to steal a game. And I know a lot of Jets fans are cynical now. You hear a lot of talk about how they're going to go 0-17. I don't think they're going to go 0-17. I think at one point a close game is going to swing their way. So, when you have a chance to get a team like the Jets down, you have to take it. If you let them hang around, that could be the week where they finally pull one out in the last minute.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's it. That's what it is. I mean, from a Bengals perspective, I said it last week, it's a must win. This week, you better win, because you have to handle business against the Jets if you're going to be a playoff team. And if you don't, like, it completely shifts the conversation to, this team, it was fun. It was a fun few weeks, Flacco fun, but that's it. Versus, you're back to 4-4. You're 2-1 with Joe Flacco. And who knows? So it's big in that sense. And it's certainly something that we'll be covering on Locked On Bengals, that John will have you covered on Locked On Jets as well. We certainly appreciate you watching, appreciate you listening. And until next time, for John Butchko, I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for tuning into a special Week 8 crossover edition of Locked On Jets and Locked On Bengals.